A little girl bought a birthday cake for a lonely millionaire with her last coins, unaware he was the city's most powerful man. "You can't afford that, little one. Now run along." The rain hammered down on the grimy window of the small bakery, 1,000 desperate fists pounding against the glass in a relentless, wild rhythm that matched the city's weary heartbeat. Lightning flashed across the sky, illuminating the worn-out street for a split second, revealing slick, black asphalt and the hunched figures of people scurrying for cover before darkness swallowed the scene whole. The world outside felt as bleak and cold as the ache in little Lily's stomach. She clutched the 3 precious coins in her small, trembling hand, their metal cool and unforgiving against her skin. The baker, a woman with a face as sour as old milk, had just shooed her away from the display of grand, ornate cakes. Her words a sharp dismissal that still echoed in the girl's ears. She was only 7, but she understood the sting of rejection, the shame of not having enough. She had been drawn to a magnificent chocolate cake, a mountain of glistening frosting and delicate sugar roses, a cake fit for a king, but the price tag was a number she couldn't even comprehend. It was a dream from another world. Her world was one of threadbare blankets and the persistent cough that echoed from her mother's room in the dead of night. They were alone. Her mother, Sarah, was a ghost of her former self, her once vibrant eyes now hollow and shadowed with a deep, unshakable weariness. A terrible sickness had settled into her lungs, a cruel thief that stole her breath and her strength, leaving her pale and fragile. The small apartment they rented was damp and cold, the wallpaper peeling in sad, curling strips, and the air thick with the scent of medicine and unspoken fear. Every day was a battle, a quiet, dignified struggle against a tide of bills that threatened to drown them. Their landlord, Mrs. Higgins, was a woman carved from ice, her visits marked by the sharp rap of her knuckles on their door and the even sharper tone of her voice as she reminded them they were 2 months behind on rent. The final notice was already pinned to the door, a stark white rectangle of doom. Sarah tried to hide her trembling hands whenever Mrs. Higgins appeared, tried to maintain a facade of control, but Lily saw the truth. She saw the tears her mother quickly wiped away when she thought Lily wasn't looking, saw the way her shoulders slumped in defeat after the landlord's visits. Lily's heart, a small and tender thing, ached with a fierce, protective love. She would do anything to see her mother smile again, to chase the shadows from her eyes. That was why she was out in this storm. The pharmacist had given her a small bottle of cough syrup, a temporary reprieve, and with the change 3 small, lonely coins. She had hoped to buy a tiny treat, a sliver of sweetness to bring back to the gloom. A single cupcake, a moment of joy. She pressed her nose against the cold glass of the bakery window again, her breath fogging the pain. Past the grand cakes, she saw them. A small tray of simple cupcakes, each with a perfect swirl of white frosting and a single red sprinkle on top. They were modest, unassuming, but to Lily, they looked like tiny promises of happiness. The baker was busy with another customer now, a woman in a fur coat who was pointing at the extravagant chocolate cake with a manicured finger. Lily knew this was her chance. She took a deep breath, the cold air stinging her lungs, and slipped back inside the warm, fragrant shop. The bell above the door chimed softly, a sound that made her flinch. She kept her head down, her small feet making no sound on the tiled floor as she approached the counter, away from the grand display. She could feel the baker's impatient eyes on her, but she focused on her mission. She pointed a small, determined finger at the tray. "Please," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the pounding rain. Just one of those. She pushed the 3 coins across the counter. They made a pathetic, tinny sound. The baker sighed, a gust of annoyance, but she took the coins, scooped one of the cupcakes into a small white box, and slid it back across the counter without a word. Lily's heart thudded with a strange mix of terror and triumph. She had done it. She clutched the small box to her chest like a sacred treasure. It was her offering. Outside, the storm raged with renewed fury. The wind howled through the narrow streets, whipping Lily's thin coat around her and snatching the hood from her head. Her hair was soaked in seconds, cold rivulets of water tracing paths down her neck. She hugged the precious box tighter, shielding it from the deluge as she hurried back towards the dim sanctuary of her home. Her journey took her past a small, elegant cafe, its windows glowing with a warm, amber hue that stood in stark contrast to the gray misery of the street. It looked like a haven, a pocket of warmth and light in a world of shadows. Through the rain-streaked glass, she saw a man sitting alone at a corner table. He was dressed in a simple dark coat, but there was an air of stillness about him, a profound and heavy sadness that seemed to create its own atmosphere. He stared into a cup of black coffee, his face etched with a grief so raw it was almost visible, a palpable thing. His shoulders were slumped, and his eyes, when he briefly looked up, were haunted, empty vessels reflecting a forgotten sorrow. He looked, Lily thought, like the loneliest man in the entire world. As she watched, two waiters passed by his table, murmuring to each other. "Poor Mr. Blackwood," one said quietly, "coming here every year on his birthday all alone. It's just heartbreaking." The words drifted through the air and found Lily. His birthday, a day that was supposed to be filled with joy and celebration, was, for this man, a day of unbearable solitude. A seismic shift occurred in Lily's small chest. Her own troubles, the cold and the hunger and the fear of eviction, seemed to momentarily recede, replaced by a wave of pure, selfless empathy for this stranger. She looked down at the small white box in her hands, the cupcake, the single sliver of sweetness she had bought for her mother, who was waiting for her, who needed her. A moment of internal hesitation, a fierce war waged in the heart of a 7-year-old. It was their last bit of comfort. But then she looked back at the man, at the cavernous loneliness in his eyes, and the war was over before it had truly begun. Her mother would understand. She always did. Taking another shaky breath, Lily pushed open the heavy door of the cafe. A bell chimed, a more melodious sound this time, and a wave of warm air, rich with the smell of coffee and pastries, enveloped her. She felt out of place, a small, soaked creature in this polished, quiet world. The man, Mr. Blackwood, looked up, his gaze distant, unfocused. He barely registered her presence. She walked slowly, hesitantly to his table, her worn shoes squeaking softly on the gleaming floor. She stood before him, a tiny, dripping figure holding a small, slightly damp white box. He finally focused on her, his hollow eyes showing a flicker of surprise, of confusion. "Hello," she said, her voice a tiny, brave whisper. She held out the box. "This is for you." Alistair Blackwood stared at the child, then at the box, his mind struggling to process the interruption to his ritual of grief. For 10 years, he had come to this same cafe on this same day. The day he had lost everything. His wife, Elena, and their daughter, Clara, in a car accident. His birthday was now an anniversary of death, a day he dedicated to the sacred act of remembering, of feeling the full, crushing weight of their absence. He came here to be alone, to drown in the sterile silence of his own shattered heart. And now this child, this fragile, rain-soaked girl, was standing before him, offering him a soggy box. "What is it?" he asked, his voice rough from disuse, the sound cracking in the quiet room. "It's a cupcake," Lily said, her sincerity unwavering. I heard it was your birthday. Nobody should be alone on their birthday." She placed the box gently on the polished marble table between them. Her small act of kindness was a stone dropped into the still, dark pool of his sorrow. The ripples were instantaneous and profound. He froze. Alistair looked from her innocent, upturned face to the simple white box. He felt a strange, unfamiliar sensation in his chest, a painful thawing around the edges of his frozen heart. Kindness. Unsolicited. Unearned. Pure kindness. It was a language he had forgotten. His world was one of transactions, of contracts and boardrooms, of people who wanted something from him, his money, his influence, his power. He was Alistair Blackwood, the founder and CEO of Blackwood Industries, a man whose name was synonymous with wealth and ruthless efficiency. He lived in a stately, cavernous mansion, surrounded by gleaming surfaces and empty rooms that echoed with the ghosts of laughter. No one gave him anything without expecting something far greater in return. Yet here was this child, who looked as if she had nothing, offering him everything she had. He was stunned into a profound, life-altering silence. He slowly reached out and opened the box. Inside sat a single, perfect cupcake. It was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. A sob, sharp and unexpected, caught in his throat. He looked back at the girl, his vision suddenly shimmering with unshed tears. "Thank you," he managed to say, the words feeling foreign on his tongue. He saw the genuine, gentle smile that lit up her face, a small sunbeam in the gloom. "Happy birthday," she whispered again. Then, as quickly as she had appeared, she turned and walked away, her small form vanishing back into the pounding rain. He was left with the cupcake, a symbol of a purity he thought no longer existed. He didn't know her name. He didn't know where she had come from. But he knew, with an undeniable, soul-shaking certainty, that he had to find her. This one small, selfless act had reawakened something within him, a purpose beyond the mere accumulation of wealth. He had to repay this debt. She was gone. Lily arrived back at the apartment, her clothes soaked through and a deep chill settled in her bones. The small bit of warmth from the cafe had vanished, replaced by the damp reality of their situation. Sarah was sitting up in bed, her face pale in the flickering light of a single lamp. "Oh, my sweet girl," she gasped, seeing Lily's shivering state. "You're soaked to the bone." She held out her arms, and Lily rushed into them, burying her face in the worn fabric of her mother's nightgown. Sarah wrapped the threadbare blanket around her daughter, her hands, though weak, moving with practiced tenderness. "Did you get the medicine?" she asked softly. Lily nodded, pulling the small bottle from her pocket. Then came the harder part. The treat. Lily's voice faltered. "I'm sorry, Mama. I didn't get one for us." Sarah stroked her wet hair. "It's all right, darling. The medicine is what matters," but Lily had to explain. In a quiet, trembling voice, she told her mother about the sad man in the cafe, about his lonely birthday, and about the cupcake. She watched her mother's face, fearing disappointment, but instead, she saw a profound, gentle understanding dawn in her hollow eyes. Sarah pulled her closer, her hug a shield against the world. "Oh, Lily," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "You have such a beautiful, kind heart. You did the right thing. You always do." Her mother's approval was a warm glow that spread through Lily's chest, chasing away some of the cold. But it couldn't chase away the hunger or the fear. Later that evening, as they shared the last of their bread and a thin, watery soup, a sharp, commanding knock echoed through the small apartment. Total silence. It was Mrs. Higgins. She didn't wait for an invitation, pushing the door open with a sharp creak of its hinges. She stood in the doorway, a formidable figure in a tailored coat, her face a mask of cold impatience. Her eyes swept over the meager room, taking in the peeling wallpaper and the single flickering lamp with a look of undisguised contempt. "Sarah," she said, her voice crisp and devoid of warmth. "I see you're still here." Sarah clutched the blanket around her shoulders, trying to sit up straighter, to project a strength she did not feel. "Mrs. Higgins," she began, her voice weak, "I was going to call you. I just need a little more time. My next check." The landlord cut her off with a dismissive wave of her hand. "Time is something you've run out of. I have been more than patient." She pulled a folded document from her purse, the paper a stark, ominous white in the dim light. She unfolded it with a sharp crackle. "This is a formal eviction notice. I have a new tenant ready to move in, one who can actually pay the rent. You have 48 hours to vacate the premises." Each word was a hammer blow, splintering the fragile hope Sarah had been clinging to. 48 hours. The phrase echoed in the sterile silence of the room. It was an impossible, cruel deadline. "Please," Sarah begged, her voice cracking. "My daughter. I'm not well. We have nowhere to go." Mrs. Higgins's lips thinned into a cruel line. "That is not my problem," she stated flatly. "This is a business, not a charity." Her cold eyes landed on Lily, who stood frozen by her mother's bedside, her small face pale with fear. Perhaps if you spent less time raising your daughter to loiter in cafes, you could afford your rent. The barb was as unnecessary as it was vicious. It was a final twist of the knife. Mrs. Higgins placed the notice on the rickety bedside table and turned to leave. 48 hours, she repeated from the doorway, her voice echoing in the sudden emptiness she left behind. The door clicked shut, the sound final and absolute. The notice sat on the table, a declaration of their doom. Sarah finally let out the sob she had been holding back, her body shaking with despair. Lily wrapped her small arms around her mother, her own tears falling silently. The world had shrunk to the size of this cold, damp room, and the future was a terrifying, unknown darkness. They had hit rock bottom. Meanwhile, across the city, Alistair Blackwood sat in his cavernous, impeccably furnished office on the top floor of the Blackwood Industries Tower. The pounding rain outside was a distant, muted sound, unable to penetrate the thick, floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a commanding view of the glittering cityscape. The small white box with the cupcakes sat on his polished mahogany desk, a stark symbol of innocence in a world of cutthroat commerce. The profound encounter had shaken him from his decade-long stupor of grief. For the first time since the accident, he felt a spark, not of happiness, but of purpose. He had spent the hours since leaving the cafe mobilizing the full, formidable force of his resources. His head of security, a discreet and ruthlessly efficient man named Thomas, stood before him. "We have her, sir," Thomas said, his voice a low monotone. "We cross-referenced the cafe's security footage with public transit cameras and facial recognition databases. Her name is Lily. She lives with her mother, Sarah Miller, at 128 Oak Street, apartment 3B. The building is owned by a holding company, but managed by a woman named Agatha Higgins." Alistair listened, his expression unreadable. He felt a strange pang of protectiveness, an emotion he hadn't felt for anyone in a very long time. "Tell me about their situation," he commanded. Thomas consulted his tablet. "Dire, sir. Sarah Miller was laid off from her job as a librarian 6 months ago due to a prolonged illness, diagnosed as chronic bronchitis. Though it seems more severe. They have no other family. Their savings are depleted. They are 2 months behind on rent and were served an eviction notice less than an hour ago." The words hit Alistair like a physical blow. The little girl who had used her last coins to buy a cupcake for a stranger was about to be thrown out onto the street. The injustice of it was a bitter taste in his mouth. A cold, quiet anger began to smolder within him. He had built an empire, conquered markets, and amassed a fortune so vast it was almost meaningless. Yet he had allowed this kind of quiet, desperate suffering to exist just a few miles from his gilded cage. The world was indeed a cruel, transactional place. But he now had the power to change one small corner of it. "Thomas," Alistair said, his voice low and steady, laced with a new, steely resolve, "you will make 2 anonymous payments. The first will cover the Miller's back rent and the next 6 months in advance. Make it untraceable through a third-party charity if you must. The second will be a larger sum, deposited directly into Sarah Miller's bank account, enough to cover living expenses and medical bills for the foreseeable future. I want it to appear as a forgotten pension payout or an insurance settlement." "Plausible. Untraceable," Thomas nodded. "Consider it done, sir." Alistair leaned back in his chair, his eyes fixed on the cupcake. That wasn't enough. It was a temporary fix, a bandage on a deeper wound. "And Thomas," he added, "find me the top pulmonary specialist in the country. Arrange a consultation for Sarah Miller. All expenses covered, again anonymously. Tell them it's a new pro bono case selected by a philanthropic foundation." He felt a strange sense of clarity, of rightness. He was not just repaying a debt. He was honoring a sacred gift. He would be their hidden savior, a guardian angel they would never know. He would watch over them from the shadows, ensuring that the cruelty of the world would never touch them again. His heart, so long dormant, began to beat with a renewed, steady rhythm. He had found his mission. The next morning, Sarah woke to a series of bewildering events. An email from her bank notified her of a significant deposit, an amount of money so large it made her gasp. The description read, "Workplace pension readjustment," from a company she barely remembered working for over a decade ago. She stared at the numbers, her mind reeling with disbelief. It had to be a mistake. But before she could even process it, a crisp envelope was slipped under their door. Inside was a receipt from Mrs. Higgins's management company, marked paid in full for the next 6 months, with a curt, typed note stating that the previous eviction notice was a clerical error. The relief was so sudden, so overwhelming, that Sarah's knees felt weak. She sank onto their worn sofa, the receipt trembling in her hand. Felt like a miracle, a reprieve from a higher power. And the miracles kept coming. Later that day, the phone rang. It was the office of Dr. Alistair Bennett, a name Sarah recognized with a jolt. He was a world-renowned specialist, a man whose articles she had read in medical journals with a sense of distant awe. His secretary explained, in a warm and professional tone, that Mrs. Miller's case had been selected by the Clara's Light Foundation for fully funded, comprehensive treatment. An appointment was already scheduled for the following week. Sarah could only stammer her thanks, her mind a whirlwind of confusion and profound gratitude. Where was all this coming from? It was too much to be a coincidence. It was as if the universe, after being so cruel, had suddenly decided to shower them with impossible kindness. A basket of fresh groceries, fruit, and warm bread appeared on their doorstep that evening, with no card, no note, no explanation. For the first time in months, the small apartment was filled with the scent of hope. Lily, seeing the color return to her mother's cheeks and the light of relief in her eyes, felt a joy so pure it was almost painful. She didn't understand how or why, but the shadows were beginning to recede. She hugged her mother tightly, convinced that the world was, after all, a magical place. Alistair watched from a distance, orchestrating their salvation with the quiet precision of a master strategist. He received daily reports from Thomas, tracking Sarah's medical progress and ensuring their every need was met. But anonymity was a cold comfort. He found himself wanting more. He wanted to see the little girl smile again, to hear her mother's voice, to know them not as a case file but as people. He needed to be sure they were truly safe, truly happy. He devised a plan, a way to enter their lives without revealing his true identity. The Clara's Light Foundation, named in memory of his daughter, was his way in. A week later, he stood outside their apartment door, his heart pounding with a nervous energy he hadn't felt in years. He wasn't the commanding CEO of Blackwood Industries today. He was Mr. L, a simple volunteer from the foundation, dressed in a soft sweater and slacks, his usual air of authority carefully concealed beneath a veneer of gentle humility. He knocked softly. The door opened, and there she was, Lily. Her eyes widened in recognition. "You're the birthday man," she said, her voice filled with a child's innocent wonder. Alistair felt a genuine smile touch his lips. "And you're the cupcake girl," he replied softly. "May I come in?" Sarah appeared behind her, her expression a mixture of surprise and curiosity. She looked healthier, her face less pale, the haunted look in her eyes replaced by a cautious optimism. Alistair introduced himself as a representative from the foundation, there to check in on them and see if there was anything else they needed. The lie felt surprisingly natural, a necessary fiction to bridge the gap between their worlds. He stepped into the small, clean apartment. It was humble, but filled with a quiet warmth that his own vast, empty mansion sorely lacked. He was home. They sat in the small living room, drinking tea from mismatched cups. The atmosphere, initially hesitant, soon warmed with genuine connection. Sarah, overwhelmed with gratitude, spoke openly about her struggles, about the fear and desperation that had been her constant companions for so long. She spoke of her illness, and the sudden, miraculous hope Dr. Bennett had given her. Alistair listened with an unwavering, steady gaze, his quiet attention making her feel seen, truly seen, for the first time in years. He didn't offer empty platitudes or false reassurances. He simply listened, his presence a calm, grounding force. He felt a profound connection to this woman, to her quiet strength and her dignified resilience. He saw the same pure, selfless spirit in her that he had first seen in her daughter. Then, in a moment of shared vulnerability, he reciprocated. He didn't tell her he was a millionaire or the secret benefactor behind her salvation. Instead, he shared the one truth that mattered, the truth that connected them on a deeper, more human level. "The foundation," he began, his voice low and tinged with a raw, unspoken grief, "is named for my daughter, Clara." He told them about the accident, about the wife and child he had lost on his birthday 10 years ago. He spoke of the suffocating loneliness, the endless, sterile silence of his life. He confessed that for a decade, he had been merely existing, not living. As he spoke, he wasn't a powerful CEO sharing a tragic backstory. He was just a man, stripped bare, revealing his most sacred wound. Sarah listened, her heart aching with empathy. She understood loss. She understood grief. She saw past the gentle facade of Mr. L and glimpsed the shattered man beneath. In their shared tragedy, a bond was forged, a quiet understanding that transcended words. She reached out and placed a gentle hand on his arm, a simple, sincere gesture of comfort. The contact was electric, a current of warmth and connection that startled them both. The scene ended not with a grand declaration, but with a moment of gentle, unspoken communion, a quiet promise of healing. Alistair became a regular visitor, a cherished friend. He brought Lily books and helped her with her homework. He sat with Sarah for hours, talking, sharing stories, and slowly, painstakingly, rebuilding the broken pieces of their lives and his own. The apartment, once a place of fear, was now filled with quiet chuckles and the comfortable silence of companionship. A fragile, tender romance began to blossom between Alistair and Sarah, unspoken but undeniable. It was a love born not of passion, but of shared grief and mutual healing. He was falling in love with her strength, her kindness, her unwavering spirit, and she was falling for the gentle, sad-eyed man who had shown her what it felt like to be safe, to be cared for, to be seen. But their fragile peace was about to be shattered. Mrs. Higgins, the landlord, had been stewing in a venomous brew of suspicion and resentment. She couldn't understand the miller's sudden reversal of fortune. The anonymous payment, the expensive groceries, the frequent visits from the well-dressed Mr. L. It all pointed to something sordid in her small, bitter mind. She was convinced they were running some kind of scam, and her pride, wounded by the clerical error note, demanded retribution. She decided to confront them, to expose them publicly and reclaim her sense of superiority. She chose her moment carefully, waiting until she saw Alistair's simple car pull up outside one afternoon. She would humiliate them all. The climax was at hand. The confrontation happened in the drab, echoing lobby of the apartment building. Mrs. Higgins was waiting for them as they returned from a walk in the park, her arms crossed, her face a thunderous mask of self-righteous fury. Well, she began, her voice dripping with venom, loud enough for the other tenants lingering nearby to hear. If it isn't the charity case and her mysterious benefactor, Sarah froze, her hand instinctively tightening on Lily's. Alistair stepped forward slightly, placing himself between them and the hostile woman. "Mrs. Higgins," he said, his voice calm but firm. "I think you're mistaken." The landlord let out a harsh, disbelieving laugh. "Oh, I'm not mistaken. I see what's going on here. This poor, sickly single mother," she sneered, gesturing dramatically at Sarah, "suddenly has her rent paid for 6 months? Suddenly has money for new clothes and fancy food? It's pathetic. I'm reporting you to social services for fraud. You're manipulating this man, and you," she rounded on Alistair, "are a fool for falling for it." The public humiliation was intense. Faces peeked out of doorways. Neighbors whispered behind their hands. Sarah's face went pale, a flush of deep, burning shame creeping up her neck. She was dignified, but visibly overwhelmed, her body trembling. Lily began to cry, burying her face in her mother's coat. Sarah tried to speak, to defend herself, but the words wouldn't come. She was trapped, pinned by the woman's vicious accusations. She felt as helpless and desperate as she had on the night of the eviction notice. Her new world was crumbling. Just as her spirit was about to break, a long, sleek black car, the kind that whispered of unimaginable wealth and power, purred to a silent stop at the curb outside the building's glass doors. The car was so out of place in this worn-out neighborhood that it drew every eye. A uniformed chauffeur stepped out and opened the rear door, and from the car emerged Thomas, Alistair's head of security, holding a crisp leather briefcase. He walked calmly to the entrance, his presence commanding and utterly unflappable. He held the door open. Then, another figure stepped out of the car. It was Alistair Blackwood, but not the gentle, unassuming Mr. Al they knew. This was a different man entirely. He wore an impeccable, custom-tailored suit of the darkest charcoal gray, a garment that radiated power. His posture was no longer gentle but commanding. His face, which had been a mask of quiet concern, was now set in lines of cold, formidable anger. He moved with the calm but powerful grace of a predator. The transformation was so absolute, so shocking, that the entire lobby fell into a stunned, cavernous silence. He was no longer a friend. He was a king. Alistair walked through the lobby doors, his polished leather shoes making no sound on the worn linoleum. His eyes, no longer soft and sad, were chips of ice, and they were fixed on Mrs. Higgins, the landlord, who had been puffed up with her own importance just moments before, visibly deflated, a sudden primal fear dawning on her face. She recognized this man, not personally but from the covers of business magazines, from the news reports about the city's most powerful, most ruthless billionaire. Her jaw went slack. Alistair stopped directly in front of her, his very presence sucking the air from the room. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. His words were quiet, precise, and each one landed with the force of a physical blow. "My name," he began, his voice a low, dangerous murmur, "is Alistair Blackwood, and you are mistaken about several things." He paused, letting the weight of his name settle in the thick silence. "First, Sarah Miller is not a charity case. She is the strongest, most resilient woman I have ever had the privilege to know. She is a woman of immense dignity and integrity, qualities you clearly know nothing about." He took a small step closer, and Mrs. Higgins flinched. "Second, I am not a fool. I am, however, a man who understands the concept of a debt. A debt I owe to her daughter, Lily." He glanced at Lily, his expression softening for a fraction of a second into one of profound tenderness. "This little girl," he continued, his voice resonating through the lobby, "found me on the worst day of my life. She saw a lonely stranger and, with what I later learned were her last few coins, she performed an act of selfless, pure kindness that saved me from a decade of darkness. She gave me a gift I can never truly repay. So no, I am not being manipulated. I am simply trying to give back a fraction of the light her daughter gave to me." He then turned his icy gaze back to the landlord. "And third," he said, his voice dropping even lower, "as of 10 minutes ago, my holding company completed the purchase of this building, which means, Mrs. Higgins, that you are standing on my property. And you are fired." He delivered the final line with a quiet finality that was more devastating than any shout. Thomas stepped forward and handed the stunned woman a single, crisp envelope. "Your severance," he said dryly. Mrs. Higgins stared at the envelope, then at Alistair, her face a mask of shattered disbelief and utter humiliation. She was speechless. The power dynamic had not just been reversed, it had been annihilated. In the aftermath of the stunning confrontation, the lobby cleared out in a hurried, whispering exodus. Mrs. Higgins, pale and trembling, stumbled away without another word, her reign of petty cruelty brought to an abrupt and definitive end. Sarah and Lily stood frozen, staring at Alistair, their minds struggling to reconcile the gentle Mr. Al with the commanding billionaire who stood before them. The silence was heavy with unspoken questions. Alistair's formidable demeanor melted away, replaced once again by the tender concern they knew. He turned to them, his eyes soft and filled with a deep, apologetic regret. "Sarah," he said, his voice gentle, "I am so sorry. I never wanted you to find out this way. I never wanted to deceive you." He explained everything. He told them about his true identity, about his immense wealth, and about how Lily's simple act of kindness had pierced through his grief and given him a reason to live again. He confessed that all the anonymous gifts, the rent, the money, the doctor, had come from him. He had been their secret guardian, watching over them because Lily had first watched over him. Sarah listened, her heart a whirlwind of emotions. Shock, disbelief, and an overwhelming, cathartic wave of gratitude. This man, this powerful, lonely man, had not saved them out of pity, but out of a profound sense of connection, a sacred debt for a child's kindness. The pieces of the puzzle clicked into place, forming a picture more beautiful and miraculous than she could have ever imagined. "You don't have to apologize," she whispered, tears glistening in her eyes. Not tears of sorrow, but of profound, unbelievable joy. "You saved us." Alistair shook his head, stepping closer and taking her hands in his. His touch was warm and steady. "No, Sarah," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You and Lily. You saved me in that moment." Standing in the drab lobby of a building he now owned, he made his final declaration. "I know this is sudden," he began, his gaze unwavering, "but my life was empty before I met you. You filled my world with a light I thought was extinguished forever. I'm not offering you my wealth as a solution to your problems. I'm offering you my heart, my protection, my future. I want to build a life with you, with both of you. I want to be a family." It was not a question, but a raw, vulnerable plea. Sarah looked from his sincere, open face to her daughter, who was now smiling, her earlier fear completely vanished. Lily seemed to understand on a level beyond words that this was right. This was their salvation. Sarah's heart, so long braced for hardship, finally, completely, let go. "Yes," she breathed, the word a quiet promise of a new beginning. Yes, he had solved all their problems, but more than that, he had healed their deepest wounds, and in doing so had healed his own. 1 year later, the golden glow of a late afternoon sun streamed through the large bay windows of a stately but warm and inviting home. The room was filled with the scent of baking cake and the sound of soft, happy laughter. This was not the cold, cavernous mansion Alistair had once inhabited alone. This was a home, alive with love and light. Sarah, her health fully restored, looked vibrant and happy, her eyes clear and full of a deep, serene joy. She moved around the spacious kitchen with an easy grace, putting the finishing touches on a magnificent chocolate cake. A cake far grander than the one Lily had once admired through a bakery window. Lily, now 8 years old and thriving, sat at the large wooden table, carefully drawing a picture with a set of new crayons. She was drawing a picture of her new family. A smiling woman, a happy little girl, and a tall man holding a cupcake. Alistair entered the room, and his entire demeanor softened at the sight of them. The haunted, hollow look was gone forever, replaced by an expression of profound contentment. He was no longer the city's most powerful man in this house. He was simply a husband and a father. He walked over to Sarah and wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. "It smells incredible," he murmured. She leaned back against him, her hand covering his. "Only the best for the birthday man," she said, her voice filled with love. He smiled, a true, easy smile that reached his eyes. Today was his birthday, but it was no longer a day of sorrow and remembrance. It was a day of celebration, a day that marked not the end of his old life, but the beginning of his new one. Lily jumped up from the table and ran to him, holding up her drawing. "I made this for you," she exclaimed. He knelt down to her level and took the drawing, his heart swelling with an emotion so powerful it almost took his breath away. "It's perfect, sweetheart," he said, his voice thick. "Absolutely perfect." Later, as they gathered around the table and Lily placed a single, glowing candle in the center of the cake, Alistair looked at the two faces illuminated by the soft, flickering light. The woman who had taught him how to love again, and the little girl who had taught him how to live again. They were his family. They were his salvation, his happily ever after. This story is a testament to the profound, almost magical power of a single, selfless act of kindness. It illustrates how one small gesture, offered without any expectation of reward, can create ripples that transform lives in the most unexpected ways. Lily, in her moment of pure empathy, did not just offer a cupcake to a stranger. She offered hope to a man drowning in despair. She reminded him, and us, that even in our darkest moments, when the world seems cold and transactional, the innate goodness of the human heart can shine through, a beacon of light that guides us back to one another. Alistair, in turn, shows us that true wealth is not measured in dollars or assets, but in the capacity to give, to protect, and to heal. His journey from a hollow, grief-stricken recluse to a loving husband and father is a powerful reminder that our deepest wounds can become our greatest strengths when we open our hearts to the possibility of connection. It is a fable of redemption, proving that it is never too late to find a new purpose, a new family, and a new beginning. If this story touched your heart and reaffirmed your faith in the quiet power of compassion, please take a moment to connect with our community. We believe that stories like these are more than just entertainment. They are nourishment for the soul, reminders of the love and light that connect us all. In a world that can often feel divided and harsh, these tales of virtue, resilience, and miraculous love serve as a sanctuary, a place where we can all remember the best of what humanity can be. Your engagement helps us to continue creating and sharing these messages of hope with a world that so deeply needs them. We invite you to become a part of our mission to spread warmth and inspiration. Please like this story if it moved you, share it with someone who might need a little bit of light in their day, and subscribe to Soulful Love Tales for more soul-stirring narratives that celebrate the enduring power of the human heart. Your support allows us to keep telling these heartwarming stories of kindness, connection, and the beautiful, unexpected ways that love can save us. We'll see you in the next one.